This presentation was recorded at the 2015 ANZICS ACCCN Annual Scientific Meeting.
I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who I had the pleasure of working alongside and meeting when I was in Adelaide, in Flinders. He's an intensivist, Shailesh Bihari, at the Flinders Medical Centre, and has been a Fellow of the College since 2011, but when you look at his bio, you can see that he's squeezed an awful lot of very clever things in over the last few years. He's completed a PhD under the watchful eye of Professor Andrew Burston, and if you know Professor Burston's interests, lung injury, lung damage, the mechanisms of that. But Shailesh is carving out a niche, particularly for himself, in the role of fluid management, fluid excess and outcomes in the ICU. And then, although that may be knowledge that we're all accumulating, is specifically the role of sodium in the ICU and the outcome of patients. So, with that hot topic in mind, we've asked Shailesh to come and speak to us today about our intensive salt units.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you. Well, continuing this idea of poisons, we thought we'll talk about a more common poison, sodium. And I'm here to talk about sodium, and interspersed between them we'll have some salt trivias. Directly to the money, we give a lot of salt. A single center, multiple center, many sites, more than 500 patients. The average salt administered to an ICU patient is 220 millimoles a day, more than 220 millimoles a day. That's an average. There are sites which gives around 400 to 500 millimoles a day. An average pediatric ICU patient gets around 5 millimole per kilogram a day. An infant gets around 6 millimole per kilogram a day. Do you know, the current recommendation for ANZ is 20 to 40 millimoles of sodium a day? Think about this. Factors. What factors might affect this? Nothing much, really. It's high on day 1, high on day 2, high on day 13, high on day 30. It's really high. There's no difference in various medical groups, surgical groups, ventilated, non-ventilated patients. There's some tribes in Amazon, in the Amazon tribes. I think they're called Yanomami tribes. Their diet does not have salt. Their normal systolic blood pressure around 90. I don't know what's normal for them, I don't know, but it's quite intriguing. Where does it come from? I guess this is the most important slide in this. Where does it come from? The fluid boluses, you think that patient is sick, they receive a lot of fluid boluses, they contribute a small amount, around 16%. Most of it comes from the sources which we don't think of, maintenance fluid. And maintenance fluid contributes a lot of salt. 0.9% saline, I don't call it normal saline, 0.9% saline is the most common maintenance fluid used in ANZ. This data is from 2011. We have repeated a point prevalence again this year, and it still is the most common maintenance fluid. Hartmann's has come up, but it's second in number. But think about other sources. If someone is getting a pantoprazole infusion at 8 mL an hour, that pantoprazole is made up mostly in 0.9% saline. They're getting 8 mL of pantoprazole of saline infusion. Someone gets a drug bolus, like hydralazine, 10 mL, made up in 0.9% saline. All the arterial lines, center lines, they are flush-based systems. What's the flush you use? Heparin saline. In fact, 75% of the times the drugs are made up in 0.9% saline. Most of the drug infusions are made up in 0.9% saline, and almost all the flushes are made up in saline. Now salt. Now salt has been the center of wars in the past. 2 major wars have been fought on salt. People from subcontinent may know about the Salt March. Mahatma Gandhi walked for 400 kilometers to liberate salt against the taxation rule of British Empire. Salt is still used as a currency in many Ethiopian tribes. Why does it matter? Well, in the modern era of making everyone negative, you actually do make them negative. This on the left-hand side graph was taken from a single center study. We do make them negative by day 3, day 4, but the sodium balance stays up. It does not come down. In fact, when we started to replicate this study in multiple centers, what we found was that the cumulative sodium balance, not the daily sodium balance, the cumulative sodium balance, and this is a balance, not administration, so we are looking at how much they are losing in the urine and the other sources, was around 700 millimoles positive by the end of day 3. Now salt has seasoned our languages. You know, the word salad is derived from salt. The word salary is derived from salt. There's a lot of history behind salt. So why bother? Sodium balance high, why bother? Well, sodium is an extracellular ion. Sits in interstitial, intravascular. We have shown by doing impedance studies that you get extracellular fluid expansion, especially in the modern area where you want to keep them in negative fluid balance all the time. And together with a positive sodium balance, you will create intracellular dehydration. We have shown that high sodium balance was associated with the lower FPF ratios and was one of the factors which predicted the length of mechanical ventilation. Again, small studies, 4 centers, but there is data out there. Talking about saline environment, in the Middle East, the Dead Sea is the most dense sea you can imagine. Its salinity is 34%. Imagine 0.9%, 34%. So if you don't know how to swim, it's a good place to take a bath. You will not drown. You'll keep on floating. Okay, why can't we take them out? Furosemide. You give them furosemide all the time or to many of your adult patients. Well, we have done in a single center and multiple centers. Furosemide creates excess diuresis, not natriuresis. What about dialysis? We can take salt out of dialysis. Surprise, surprise. Whatever mode you look at, if you look at continuous modes like CVVHDF, CVVHF, the bag which comes in have a salt concentration of 140 millimoles a liter. The average sodium concentration of a patient requiring dialysis is 135. It creates a positive flux into the patient. You remove water, you give sodium. What about intermittent dialysis? You can dial up sodium in that. Well, the default sodium reading on your Fresenius machine is 140. If you're not careful, you'll still end up giving sodium to the patient. So in fact, this dialysis modes, remove water, give sodium. Salt and culture. A popular European culture is that when someone is in a coffin, you put salt in them. Apparently, it's a symbol of incorruptibility and immortality. Some Buddhist cultures say that when you come back from funeral, you throw salt over your back. Keep the evil spirits away. So what are the real options then? I've just gone very negative till now. Well, there are some simple options. This study is currently underway at 2 centers in South Australia of just trying to be aware of how to decrease salt load. Use 5% dextrose as a maintenance fluid or don't use maintenance fluid at all, as many of the New Zealand sites do. Use 5% dextrose as a vehicle for infusions and boluses. Think about flushes. What flush you want to use. Maybe use half normal saline. These are the modifiable sources. Use low sodium feeds. The rest of the sources becomes more non-modifiable. But these simple measures, at least our mathematics tell us it should drop from currently 220 millimoles to around 100 millimoles. You know, a young Michael Jordan was so small that he was very upset about it. So the mom told him that put some salt in his socks. Legend tells that he apparently still does it. He puts salt in his socks. What about removing it? I mean, we did a study of adding intapamide, which is a thiazide diuretic, to furosemide in fluid-overloaded patients. And we did achieve more natriuresis. This study is under review at the moment. We actually removed a lot of salt in those patients, in fluid-overloaded patients. Remove with CRRT? Well, if you remove fluid, early remove of fluid with CRRT, you will remove some sodium. And if you're doing intermittent hemodialysis, then watch what sodium and dial up in those machines. Now, if you're really thirsty and if you've got seawater, don't drink it, because your kidney cannot remove that much of salt, and you lose more water in the effort to remove it. Most of the fish is also that way. Some of the other fishes are freshwater or salt water. But there are some fishes there, like the salmons and eels, who can live both in salt water and fresh water. The kidneys can adapt very quickly. Maybe an area of research. Finally, to summarize, modern ICU practices, either knowingly or unknowingly, inadvertently leads to a lot of sodium administration. Now, these patients have stress, renal dysfunction, renin, angiotensin, aldosterone going crazy. They lead to sodium, positive sodium balance. A positive sodium balance in turn expands your extracellular compartment, which can have adverse effects like respiratory dysfunction. Simple strategies like restriction of 5% use of 5% dextrose as a vehicle for a lot of drugs and drug administration, as maintenance fluids, and thinking about flushes will help us in optimizing the sodium balance. Maybe elimination techniques like adding intapamide to your furosemide, a smaller intapamide, and maybe a better thought to your sodium flux during dialysis will help us in optimizing the sodium balance. Thank you.